good one. Oh. Come on. That's a nice one. That's the biggest of the day. That's a really nice fish for out here. Really chunky too. Come on. Oh, I would take that out here every day of the week, guys. The fish is pushing 4 pounds. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. As you saw in that first fish catch, we are talking about the weedless wacky shot. This guy right here, the new straight shank design that we've come out with. This isn't entirely replacing our original wacky shot because that is a non-weedless version and there are a lot of really good uses for it. But we do feel like we've made some improvements on this version over the previous version. And I want to talk to you a little bit why we created this one and really what all of the different features are to it. It is definitely a different version than the original wacky shot. And ultimately what we wanted to create was a weedless wacky rig. We have experimented with all the different ones that are on the market, and I've had such trouble finding a good weedless wacky rig hook. Generally speaking, they either have a weed guard on it that tends to do almost nothing, or the weed guard is too stiff where it ends up being a hindrance to the fish catches. And we feel like we've really just come up with a good version here with a light wire weed guard that is definitely weedless enough to bring it through brush piles and your heavier structure, but it's also not too heavy where it's going to limit the fish catches and actually back the bait out. A lot of today's weed guards on wacky rigs have like a tungsten wire or a titanium wire, and what it does is it wants to push back. This is one issue you see even with bristle weed guards on jigs, on a big jig. Those weed guards actually are creating resistance. So when you pull down on it, that weed guard's actually pushing back up. One of the reasons we love our single wire weed guards is when you push down on it, that weed guard moves out of the way. As you can see, it's just a simple design that prevents that pressure from trying to back the hook out of the fish's mouth. So that's one of the main reasons why we wanted to put a single wire weed guard in it. So from the standpoint of making it weedless, that's not a huge development. There's a lot of single wire weed guards on the market, but I did want to actually approach that or mention that. The other thing is with respect to the length of the weed guard, we left it a hair long, and we did that for a couple of reasons. One, if you're not fishing really heavy cover, what I like to do is I'll trim it down. So I'll actually take, some wire cutters and I'll trim it down so that, you probably have reduced it from about 3/8 of an inch over to a 1/4 inch or even an 1/8 inch where it's just barely covering the hook. But if you're fishing really heavy structure, a lot of wood, then what I like to do is I'll actually take my wire weed guard and I'll bend it just a hair, just like that. And I do that because that little tag end really prevents your bait from getting hung up. So I like to have the option to trim my weed guard down to the desired cover that I'm fishing. So that's just something to keep in mind like that. Now, a couple other features that I want to talk about. So we've got in this a straight shank Trocar TK137 hook. So it's their finesse, their NACO hook. It's not the finesse hook, but it's their NACO hook. We love this hook. So it's extremely sharp. It's a straight shank, so you get a little bit more gap. It's got more hooking power than some of your lighter wire wacky rigs, but it's still small enough where you can drive the hook home with your light, your normal finesse presentations and tackle that you're using with a wacky rig. But this hook is one of those hooks that when you hook them, they don't throw it. It's just amazing how good that these actually hold when you compare them to other wacky rig hooks. So this was like one of our preferred ones. Plus the Trocars are all made in the USA, so we like supporting that as well. Now, when you look at the hitchhiker on here, we have strategically placed that to be in what we consider to be the perfect position for your bait. So when you take a Wacky rig, whatever Wacky rig you got, and I don't know why I don't have one. All right, so I've got a Berkley Max Scent, the general 5-inch size, and I'm gonna take this and rig it. But a couple of things I want to point out. So this is a custom-made hitchhiker. So we have that specifically designed, and it's bigger than other ones you can get on the market, because the wider the diameter of your hitchhiker, the better the holding power is. So we wanted something that would not allow your bait to rip out. Now, when you're rigging it, I like to rig it this way. I just bend the weed guard back a little bit. You take your hook point and you put it right in the center of the worm, wherever it is that you want it. And the key here is now it's already centered perfectly for the hitchhiker. So then you just take it and just screw it on just like you would any other hitchhiker. And you want to screw it up to the point where the worm butts up against the weight. And there's a lot of key reason for that. Now, first off, just talking about the holding power here, the holding power is unbelievable. You are going to be extremely blown away by how good that hitchhiker works, and the fact that the worm is mounted on the hook, the shaft of the hook itself. So you've actually got like that double holding power. But this bait skips unbelievably well because now the worm is connected to the weight, so you don't have that loose end. If you were throwing a weighted Wacky rig, the weight on a traditional hook, that weight is separate from the worm, and that weight can catch and really slow the bait down on the skip. This is going to be the best skipping Wacky rig you've used. Couple other things to point out now with that. Now, I do want to point out too, depending on the worm you're using, you may actually want to trim that hitchhiker down. Feel free to cut a little bit off. Take your pliers again and cut one ring off if you want that. Generally speaking, if I'm throwing a thinner worm and I've got a little bit of that hitchhiker sticking out, I don't really care about that. But some people think that, maybe that doesn't look as good. So trim a little off. Your holding power is still going to be as good. But one of the keys with this whole setup, and this is really why I feel like the future of Wacky rigging are hooks like this. As soon as you bring that weight in contact with the worm itself, you create a much more compact fall. And what that does is it changes the fall of your bait. It actually increases the fall rate slightly, and it makes a tighter vibration, which to me is more realistic than, say, a traditional Wacky rig where your arms are really going side to side a lot more. So now, not only now do you have better castability and better skipability, your bait has a different fall than your traditional Wacky rig. So that's something I love. The other thing is the placement of this weight keeps the bait falling. Let me fix the weed guard. Keeps the bait falling so that hook point is up. That helps with your hookups versus a lot of other weighted Wacky rigs. They'll fall in whatever direction the bait's falling. It'll actually fall like this is how it'll fall. So depending on where the fish is coming from, that hook point could be on the bottom of the mouth. It could be in the top of the mouth. This will actually fall much more horizontal and keep your hook point up, which generally provides you with better hookups in the top of the mouth, which is where you want your fish to be hooked. On top of that, because it's falling that way, it'll fall and actually rest hook point up versus a weighted Wacky rig, which could fall in any direction, hit the bottom and roll over. A lot of times when you have fish take the bait off the bottom, if you miss them on the hook set, it's because your hook point is down. So when that fish comes up and bites it, the hook point's down. In this case, the bait will actually sit hook point up, which we think makes a really big difference. So there's a lot of benefits to this. Now, I am not going to say 100% certain, but we probably will come out with this hook as well in a non-weedless version. I don't see it happening right away, but I do think we see that just because I love this hook that much that in a lot of situations I fish it where I don't necessarily need a weed guard, and I would rather not cut the weed guard off of a good hook. I'd rather make them for myself just without the weed guard. Now, the other thing I want to point out too, we've gotten requests for making a non-weightless version. Well, unfortunately with this design, we have to have a tiny bit of weight to lock in our hitchhiker and our weed guard. But this whole contraption, the whole hook, weighs 1/28 of an ounce. That is not much at all when you compare it to just the weight of the hook and the weed guard and the hitchhiker. You're not even doubling the weight. So when you compare the fall rate of this to a non-weighted wacky rig, the fall rate is not much faster at all because it's such a small amount of weight. But that's also why we came out with the 1/8 ounce. We did want something to help us get deeper, to fish some, fish that are just in more of that 8 to 10 foot range or suspended over deeper water. We did want something to get the bait down a little bit faster. And overall, the number one weighted wacky rig size is an 1/8 ounce. So we wanted to come out with that as well. I'm hopeful that in the future, if you guys like the hook as much as we do, that maybe we'll come out with something in the middle too, like 16th ounce and the non-weedless versions. But this guy right here, guys, I'm telling you, dynamite little hook. That trocar in there fits it perfectly. It's just a great match. So if you're a big wacky rig fisherman, I highly recommend checking these out. I know that you're going to see more of these on the market. There is definitely something to bringing the weight in contact with the worm that gives it a different look that just generates a lot of bites. So check it out, guys. If you have them and you've been using them, let me know in the comments section. What do you think about them? I would love to hear from all of you as well. Otherwise, hit the like button if you enjoyed today's video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned. We'll have a new video coming out tomorrow.